Hey y'all, Doug with D&E in the garage. Today I'm coming at you with another podcast. This podcast, though, is not going to be so much about facts as much as it is going to be about a conspiracy theory per se. All right, it's not also going to be about Mopar or Jeeps. It's actually going to be about GM, and more specifically about Corvette. All right, and the fact that it almost seems like the Corvette is bloodthirsty. That's right. The theory that I'm coming at you with today is the theory that a lot of cars had to die for Corvette to remain number one. Because that's what Corvette is, right? Corvette is number one, right? I'm not a GM guy, but let's be honest. The Corvette is one of the most storied nameplates ever, and certainly in our country. All right, if you are going to insult Corvette, you better make sure that you're alone in a soundproof room, because if not, somebody's going to be there to back up that nameplate. People love Corvettes. All right, and it's the only car like it that remains since its beginning. I mean, yeah, in '83 they didn't have Corvettes, but that's California's fault and another story. But think about the other American cars that would have competed with Corvette. You got the Ford GT and GT40 that they make now and again, but that doesn't count. That's a supercar, you know. The Dodge Viper was a legitimate two-seat sports car like the Corvette. It's gone now, though, you know. The Corvette is something special, and the theory that I'm going to bring you guys today is one that people have talked about for years. The theory is that it didn't just happen by accident that Corvette is number one. All right, GM has for years been coddling Corvette. And in fact, there is a whole laundry list of vehicles that had to be detuned, decommissioned, or straight up taken off the table to never be produced in order for Corvette to remain number one. All right, so I want to dig into some facts. You hear people whisper all the time, oh, this car would have made this horsepower, but GM detuned it because it couldn't be faster than the Corvette. And then they just leave it there. It's just offhand. It's like accepted. You know, Camaro guys, you know what I'm talking about. People are always saying that, you know, Corvette and a Camaro get the same motor, but the Corvette one makes 25 horsepower more than the Camaro one. You know, why is that? And why, and just in general, why, you know, why does Corvette always come out on top? There's a line from The Departed that Jack Nicholson's character Frank Costello said. It said, a lot of people had to die for me to be me. And I believe that's true with the Corvette. Now I'm going to present these facts to you and this stuff that I've learned. I've done a ton of research on this topic, and it was not an easy topic to research because there aren't so much concrete facts as suggestions, suspicions, theories. And so it was really difficult to figure out what might be evidence of what I'm going to call the killer Corvette conspiracy. All right, mostly because I like alliteration. Before we get into it, here are the disclaimers. This is not an anti-Corvette conversation. This is not an anti-GM conversation. This is just a conversation. All right, I'm a historian and I'm a car guy. So car history, that absolutely appeals to me. And there's no vehicle more historic than the Corvette, you know? So naturally, there are a lot of things that have been said over the years about Corvette, and that's what I was seeking out to find. I did a ton of research about this because I'm not a GM guy. I don't have the same knowledge of platforms and motors and linear history of that particular brand that I do of Mopar or Jeep. So, if I make any mistakes, by all means, correct me down in the squawk boxes below. I did a ton of research. I'll cite my sources. I'll include a bibliography, I swear, to try to prove to you that I did my research. The last disclaimer, I'm not necessarily suggesting this as true. I'm not suggesting it is not true. I just think it's very interesting. Let's get into it. 1953. The Corvette is launched, all right? Most people don't know unless you're a GM guy. The first year of the Corvette was terrible. It was underpowered, it leaked, it had really bad craftsmanship. It was put together like garbage, and it had no amenities, all right? Nobody liked the Corvette for the first few years it was around. It had an inline six, the Blue Flame engine that was underpowered. The whole point of the Corvette was to be GM's European sports car. It looked like one, long hood, short rear deck, did not perform like one, all right? That did not stop two other GM companies from making similar vehicles. Oldsmobile and Pontiac in 1953 created two concept cars that were they were based on the Corvette. They look just like the Corvette. They were going to serve the same purpose. And the idea was this. As GM and all automakers do, if this one vehicle takes off, they're going to find a way to market it to other segments. So the Oldsmobile one, which was called the F88, was going to be marketed as a more luxury version of the Corvette. And the Pontiac one was going to be known as the Bonneville Special, and that was, by the way, that has nothing to do with the Bonnevilles that would come later on. That was that was the first usage of that name. In this concept car, it was going to be the really souped up version of the Corvette. It had the Super 88 inline 8 engine. It had a glass like cockpit like roof. It had gull wing doors, and the idea was if the Chevrolet Corvette took off, the other brands would produce it. It's the same thing they do today. You know, Chevy makes a platform, and then Cadillac gets a version, and Buick gets a version, and that's just the way it goes. What happens is this: the first few years the Corvette does not take off, so obviously they're not going to release these cars, but then it does. All right, and it starts doing really well, and it does so well that Ford actually answers the Corvette with the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird was originally designed and produced and manufactured to compete directly with the Corvette. That was Ford's answer for the Corvette. All right, so now the Corvette is becoming something to be proud of. So Oldsmobile and Pontiac come to the table at GM and they say, cool, let's release ours. They're all ready to go. And the guys at GM say, well, I don't know. We wouldn't want to cannibalize Corvette. Now that makes sense, I guess. Obviously it does, but at the same time, that's what Chevy always does. You know what I mean? They make the Camaro, and then Pontiac makes the Firebird. You know, that's what they do. That's the whole point of having multiple brands under one big umbrella. This is the first instance where you can look at a situation and say, yeah, GM kind of favored Corvette contrary to what it would usually do. Usually, if Chevrolet made a popular car on that same platform, they would make an upscale one, and maybe a cheaper one, and maybe a more sophisticated one, you know? But in this case, they did not. The next case of a vehicle being completely taken off the table comes just a few years later. It's called the Pontiac Banshee. The Pontiac Banshee was brought to the table by a man named John DeLorean. Maybe you've heard of him. Long before he was traveling through time in his own DMC-12, John DeLorean was the president of Pontiac. He's the man responsible for the GTO as we know it, the Grand Tempest option. One of the most popular American cars of all time, right? The Judge. He brings the GTO to market. It's a smash success. Overnight, Pontiac is a name in the budding performance car market. All right? So he's thinking, cool, how do I capitalize on this? I know. I'll make a two-seater sports car. And he designs what he calls the Pontiac Banshee concept car. It's similar to the Corvette in the same way that the Viper is similar to the Corvette, you know? Huge hood, small rear deck, big engine. It's a European-style roadster sports car, right? And he's told, absolutely not. There's no way we're going to let you cannibalize Corvette's business. And again, it's that same mentality. It's like, why not? You guys are selling Corvettes. Let John DeLorean and Pontiac sell another vehicle along those same lines to try to steal more business, all right? Why keep all the business for Corvette when there are probably people not buying Corvettes that would like a two-door sports car? Maybe they want it, you know, in an upscale market or a downscale market. That's how automakers like GM work. That's why there are so many nameplates and manufacturers under the GM umbrella, so that they can make sure they have a GM for everybody. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, over the course of Pontiac, until it died in, 2009, the Banshee is brought up 4 separate times, always with the same theme, two-door sports car, two-seater sports car, and every time it's shot down for the same reason. I'm not going to have you cannibalizing our Corvette sales. Doesn't make sense to me. The next category of vehicles whose blood are allegedly on Corvette's hands are the vehicles that GM has allegedly detuned because they would have given Corvette a black eye with the performance they were able to offer at the price point. All right, now the one that is obvious to talk about is the Camaro. Camaro guys and Corvette guys are forever arguing because the common accepted fact is that GM will put the exact same motor in the Corvette and the Camaro, and they'll detune the one for the Camaro because nothing can be faster than a Corvette, right? There are plenty of examples of it. The one that comes to mind right now is the early 90s Camaro and Corvette. They both had the LT1. The Corvette was making 300 horsepower and they gave it 4-bolt mains. The Camaro got 2-bolt mains and made 25 or 30 less horsepower. Now, my question is why? Given Corvettes or Camaro's place in life, why would you ever hold anything back? And let me explain. The Camaro was built for the singular purpose of competing with the Mustang. And that has been its lot in life from day one. The Camaro exists as a counterpoint for the Mustang. That's it. All right? And every single time they release a new Camaro or a new Mustang, it is always compared to the other. Always. Now, if you have an engine that can produce X horsepower, why would you not put that in the Camaro? And sure, maybe you have to tack on 2 or 3 grand. Use it as the most upscale option. Why would you not give the Camaro everything possible when possibly the greatest automotive rivalry in the United States, outside of like F1 and stuff, is Camaro versus Mustang? I don't understand that. Ford wouldn't do that. They do some crazy stuff with the Mustang. But Chevy will have this motor that they built for the Corvette, and the one they put in the Camaro will have less aggressive cams. It'll have, like I said, the 2-bolt versus 4-bolt main. Why? You know? And the only thing that comes to mind is the Corvette has to be number 1. That's it. That's the American way. Corvette's number 1. I mean, maybe they have to justify why, you know, the Corvette is so much more expensive than the Camaro. Maybe that's it, but it doesn't make any sense to me. If you have the motor, use it. Another interesting example of possible detuning is this. Now, this one's a gray area, and this theory is all my own. I couldn't find anything to back this up on the internet. There's only one vehicle that's ever been built on the same platform as a Corvette, and that is the Cadillac XLR. It's on the same platform as the C7, I believe. The Cadillac XLR is basically a C7. The only difference is some badging, some sheet metal, and the motor. The motor, all right? They built a more expensive, they found a way to charge more for a Corvette. They slapped a Cadillac badge on it, but they gave it the awful, complex for the sake of complexity, ready to burst at any minute, Northstar Motor. All right? I have personally had experience with these motors. They're terrible. They're complex for the sake of complexity. The only benefit of a Northstar is that it gives them something interesting to put on a pamphlet to try to sell this to people who don't know any better, right? When they have the LS, you have the LS. You already built, it's a Corvette. The XLR is a Corvette, but they didn't give it the LS. And as a result, it is significantly slower than a Corvette would have been. Now, you can sit there and tell me that, well, the type of person that's buying a Cadillac isn't necessarily looking for the same type of speed that someone who buys a Corvette is, but they bought a Corvette. They bought a Cadillac Corvette. That's what they did. They didn't buy I don't even know what Cadillac's brands are right now. They didn't buy a sedan, you know what I mean? They bought a Corvette. It is a Corvette. All right, but they didn't put the LS motor in there. And I think the reason they didn't put the LS motor in there is because they couldn't have something out there that was as fast as the Corvette without being a Corvette. They needed that separation because Corvette's image is so delicate and so important to them that they will not risk anything getting in the way. And the reality is this, the XLR didn't sell very well, and they're not, maybe someday it'll be like a collector's car because they only made it for a short amount of time, but it wasn't a good car as a result, and there's no reason, right? Corvettes are incredibly sophisticated. They are great cars, especially now, the C3 notwithstanding. The C3 was a pretty terrible car, but the rest of them are, for their time, engineering marvels. They have top of the line, best of the best, cutting edge. If you're gonna make something on a Corvette platform, don't take away one of the best parts of the Corvette, which right now is the LS, all right? I think that this is another example. I'll bet you that in early designs of the XLR, it was supposed to have an LS. I know that Cadillac uses the Northstar, but it just doesn't make sense. Why you would put, what is the Northstar they put in there's like a 5.6? When you've got that LS, 4.6 rather, when you've got that 6-liter LS sitting around, I think that's another example of Corvette's potential competition inside GM being stifled. Now here is another interesting one that I couldn't find anything to back up. I couldn't find anything to back this up. I didn't think of it myself. There's one guy on a Corvette forum that was suggesting that the mid-80s Pontiac Fiero was detuned because its performance would have been not better than, but too close to the newly released for the C4 TPI fuel injection 305 engine. All right. What this man asserted was that he had a Fiero or knew a guy. I don't know where he got this from. The problem with most of these facts are it's just conjecture. We can't prove any of this. But this man suggested, the point is that people are talking about it. That's why I'm presenting it to you. You know, there are guys on the internet who are saying, yep, that car was detuned. That car was never brought to the table because of Corvette, because of Corvette, because of Corvette. So this guy says that the Pontiac Fiero, he's not saying it would have been faster, but it would have been too close to Corvette. And you know, I could see how that's possible. Did you know that the C4 was supposed to be mid-engine? All right, I think his name is Zora. He was one of Corvette's main designers. He desperately wanted to make a mid-engine Corvette, and the C4 was supposed to be that car. It was supposed to be mid-engine, but they did whatever studies they do, and they found out that Americans were not going to buy a mid-engine vehicle unless it had a V8, and for some reason Zora couldn't figure out how to fit a V8 in a Corvette design. I don't know, whatever reason it was, they found out that they decided that Americans weren't going to buy it. So if a mid-engine car was around during that time selling under the same umbrella, Pontiac, I could see how they would want to make sure that that mid-engine car came nowhere near the Corvette's capabilities, especially considering it was significantly cheaper than the Corvette. A Pontiac Fiero was significantly cheaper than a Corvette. Just another potential example of how the Corvette has to be number one. And see, the thing is, you don't hear this stuff about other cars. You never hear about Dodge detuning the Challenger because the Charger was getting too fast, or Viper, this, that, and the third. No, man, just balls to the wall. Look what they're doing now. They will put that SRT motor in friggin' anything. They're putting it in Grand Cherokees. They're putting it in Dodge Durangos. If the Dart had stuck around, you probably would have seen a 392 Dart, which would have been really insane. The point is, Ford, you don't hear Ford doing that. You know what I mean? They take the same, they will put the Mustang motor in anything. They're putting the Coyote in a Lincoln right now. Eric was talking about it again in that New York Auto Show video. Check the card up in the corner if you want to check that out. Eric was telling us about they put all the Mustang suspension and the Mustang motor and everything into this new Lincoln SUV. That's the kind of stuff other companies do. Cross-pollination. Take ideas from here, move it there. GM doesn't seem to do that. They keep the Corvette on a pedestal, and they don't let anything get too close to it. And that's what brings us to our next topic of vehicles. Vehicles that most people believe were discontinued because their performance, their stats got too close to that of Corvettes. All right, now the first one I want to talk about are the GMC Cyclone and Typhoon. All right, if you don't know, these are GMC trucks. The Cyclone is a pickup truck based on the Sonoma, which is based on the Chevy S10. And the Typhoon is based on the GMC Jimmy, based on the S10 platform, again, the Chevy Blazer. And from 91 to 93, these vehicles were made. They had a 4.6 liter intercooled turbocharged engine, and they absolutely destroyed. And they were all-wheel drive. They had all-wheel drive, so these things launched harder than any other vehicle at the time. All right. In 1991, they made the Cyclone, and if you go to look that up, which I suggest you do because it is a cool-looking truck, body kits, all this stuff. It's spelled with an S, S-Y-C-L-O-N-E. They only made it in 91, 1 year. All right, limited edition run. After that, they made the Typhoon, which was the SUV version based on a GMC Jimmy. almost as fast. It was a little bit heavier. Here's the thing. Off the line, this thing would beat the Corvette because of the all-wheel drive. It launched hard as heck. And then that turbo would kick in, and I did extensive research on this. People who have never driven or raced a Corvette versus Cyclone or Typhoon say that the Corvette would have won no matter what. People who actually were like, yeah, one time I was in my Corvette and a Cyclone was over there and I tried to race it, they say that it was like a toss-up. It depended on the driver who was going to win at the quarter mile. Now, they're trucks, so after the quarter mile, the Corvette's gone. The top speed on both the Cyclone and the Typhoon was 126 miles an hour. The Corvette at the time, which I think was still the C4, or was it the C5 by that, 91 and 93? I think it's a C5, doesn't matter. The top speed was in the 180s or something crazy like that. The point is this, they were half the price, half. And they were still less expensive than a Camaro at the time. And they were trucks. How bad does it look if you're, I don't know how much a Corvette cost in 91. Your Corvette that costs this much is getting beat in the quarter mile by a truck that costs this much and is being sold under the same company, you know? Now, I believe a company like Dodge or Ford would say, cool, man, that's awesome. Let's figure out a way to capitalize on this. Not GM. They sold the Cyclone only in 91. They sold the Typhoon only in 92 and 93. Now, people who are not inclined to agree with what I'm saying right now will say, well, that's all they were ever going to do. They were special edition vehicles. And companies do that all the time. It's true. I don't know, though. You know, I think that their performance got a little bit too close to the Corvette, and maybe even to a lesser degree the Camaro. They were less expensive. It was literally half the price of a Corvette. You could get one of these trucks. It's an all-wheel drive truck, and they destroyed. Now, the absolute pinnacle of things being lied about, detuned, or shady deals happening because it got too close to the Corvette, and this is the only real concrete evidence we have, the Grand National. Now, if you will allow me to, I will nerd out about the Grand National for one quick moment. For those that don't know, the Grand National is a appearance package of the T-Type. The T-Type is a performance package of the Buick Regal. All right. Now, the Grand National nameplate was around for a number of years, but in reality, true Grand Nationals, intercoolers, turbos, all black, badging, 84 to 87. That's all we got it. All right. The Grand National came onto the scene. It had, what is it, a 4.3 liter, I believe. Like I said, I'm not great with GM motors. I believe the Grand National had a 4.3 liter intercooled turbocharged engine, and it was the fastest car in the world, I believe, except for the Ferrari at that time. Screw the Corvette. Forget about the Camaro, Mustangs, whatever else you got. From 84 to 87, the Grand National was destroying, to the point where in 87, the last year it was ever produced, the model was not just called the Grand National, it was called the GNX. It stood for Grand National Experimental. This thing was the absolute pinnacle, all right? It had a anti-torsion bar that had to be specially designed just for that car to try to keep the car from doing wheelies so that you could actually take off the line. They released this vehicle, Buick did, with whatever stats, you know, whatever they were saying the stats were, X horsepower and Y torque. People started getting their hands on them and they realized the stats were way higher. Way higher. It came out afterwards that Buick was asked to lie about the official performance of the GNX because Corvette was being embarrassed. The Corvette was being embarrassed. In 84, they had just released the C4, which was the most sophisticated Corvette to date, and immediately it's getting embarrassed, not even by a V8. And if you remember, the whole reason that Zora couldn't make his mid-engine Corvette was because allegedly no one would buy anything that wasn't a V8. And here's this V6 turbo? Turbo? Yeah, man. Yeah, and Corvette was embarrassed. So, Buick is asked, lie about the performance of the GNX. And then the GNX just goes away. Probably one of the most popular cars that Buick has ever made, right? It had been years since Buick had any reputation for anything as just being a piece of GM. And then they get rid of it? Doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't make sense at all. Why the Buick Regal T-Type Grand National could not have continued to be around for a number of years. Why don't they bring it back today? People are all about Turbo 6s now. Bring the Buick Regal Grand National back. They would sell like crazy. Do a Ford EcoBoost type thing. Haven't done it yet. And I think some people would assert that is probably because Corvette has still not fully recovered from the black eye that the Grand National gave it back in 1987. There are a number of other vehicles that GM has produced. The S10 Extreme comes to mind, the Chevy SS Caprice, that were blistering fast, that people who are into racing friggin' loved, and they never seem to make them very long. They'll be here for a few years and then they're gone. The Caprice, I know the Caprice didn't sell very well. I think there's some weird story with the Caprice SS where it was supposed to be a World Markets car, but they had to make it here to make it legitimate. I don't know, but it's a cop car. We got a few of them in my town. They look pretty cool. What about the Extreme? You know what I mean? What about the SS badge in general? They don't do that much anymore. So here's the thing, guys. Like I said in the beginning, this was not an anti-Corvette video. I like Corvettes, man. You know, it's not my thing per se, but I respect them. I sure do. And I like GM. You know what I mean? I think this is pretty interesting because no other vehicle or nameplate or brand can you say these things about and present so much possible evidence. And none of these things by themselves are particularly damning, but when you look at them as a whole, and I didn't even get all of them. You know what I mean? There are things out there that I decided not to put in, and I'm sure there are plenty of stories that I just haven't even heard about. You know what I mean? When you look at them as a whole, it makes you wonder, is Corvette being unfairly favored? And did we miss out on some serious power and some seriously cool cars so that Corvette could continue to be number one? That's the biggest problem. That's the only problem I see with it. I understand protecting your nameplate, but man, if the Grand National could have stuck around, that would have been freaking awesome, right? You know, who knows what could have come from like the Banshee, the F88, and the Bonneville Special, you know? Who knows what they would have done with those? In general, I think Pontiac does some really, or did some really cool stuff. I wish they had been able to stick around. Who knows? Maybe if they had a Corvette style car to get them through the hard times, Pontiac would still be around. I'm not saying they are, or that is the case. Who knows? We will never know because Pontiac is not around. And the Banshee was never made, and the Bonneville Special was never made. We will never know for sure if vehicles like the Fiero were actually detuned, if the XLR was ever supposed to get the LS. We will never know if maybe the Cyclone and the Typhoon really were meant to be limited edition cars. Maybe the Extreme and the Grand National went away for some completely reasonable reason. Maybe they'll come back someday. I hope so. I believe somebody was teasing the Grand National as making a comeback in the 2020s at some point, but I don't know. I don't know. Haven't heard anything solid. So let me know what you think. If you are a GM guy, first of all, go ahead, correct me if I got any engine sizes or platform names wrong. I know you're going to. Leave me a comment down there in the squawk boxes. What do you think? Are you a Corvette guy? Are you a Camaro guy, more importantly? What do you think? Is this possible? Do any of these things make sense? Do you have any other evidence that I missed? I'd love to hear from you. I hope you found the video entertaining, amusing, maybe even a little educational. I don't know. I certainly got a lot of education researching it. If you did, by all means, like the video. Like I said, leave me that comment down in the squawk box. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.